Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your host, JP John Poz for the Two Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me, my co host, the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, John, I'm doing well. I submitted my doctoral thesis for review by the committee. So I have to defend in exactly 1 month as we're recording this. So plenty of time for other things at the moment, including 45 pages of notes today.
Yes, a lot to get to. Very interesting, though, when we get to GCW, you'll be glad to hear that I recently interviewed Joe Janela. Will be out soon. A lot of GCW talk. So interesting. We'll hopefully maybe get into that a little bit later. But I'm curious because of the indie scene, what's going on? Are they killing the indies? What is going on with WWE and the WWEID? Because I think it will have potential effects on the independent scene, but also if you have a title belt and you say I'm not losing because I'm the WWID champion on some indie show, does that hold any weight? So, what do you think about the ID program and the title?
Yeah, so our friend Chris GST, one of the bigwigs at PW Ponderings, posed the following question: what effect do you think WWE will have on the indie scene? Um, and it's a really interesting one. Obviously, we face a variety of unknowns right now, but I think what it is today certainly will not be what it is in 3 months, and then the curiosity, what will it be a year, and so on beyond that. Corporations ultimately turn to conformity and structure, and the Wild West version of it now, where people under WWEID are kind of seemingly floating to where they want, and the promotion is putting a little WWEID logo on their poster. It all sounds good until there's a problem, right? So if you have the WWEID logo on your poster, we know at the independent scene, thankfully, most people are good people, but anything related to human resources and talents and so on and entertainment, there's people that aren't so great and don't represent your brand well. So suppose it's a situation where there's a WWE ID talent and there's somebody that's been formally convicted or accused of, really inappropriate things, illegal things, obviously. Does WWE want to be associated with that? What will they do when somebody notices? I'm thinking back to, what was it, Tiger Ali Singh, when they WWE used to shepherd talent to Puerto Rico, sort of like a semi-informal developmental system, and he got hurt there. Um, was it just a fluke? Was there something different about the ring? Something like that. So it's not in their control. So when you're sending talents that represent your brand out into the world, you have challenges, especially if you have a title belt. At the moment, it seems like it's going as you'd expect. That Gabe Sapolsky has the longtime connections with the WWN type promotions in Florida, and some marquee matches are going there. They have their formal training systems, understandably, with Booker T's Reality of Wrestling and those promotions and so on. So, like, how much talent will we see float out? What's the WWE's ambitions? Like, do they want to create a formal minor league system where that's what the minor league system appears to be in the United States? Meaning, like, when you think about Major League Baseball, right, there's all the different tiers of short season A, double A, triple A, whatever. And yes, there are independent leagues, but they're fairly low profile. Some of the cities have very entrepreneurial owners and they get their own attention, but most people are aiming to be part of this system. So will it become systematized in such a way? I think eventually it will. And going back to Chris's original question, what effects do you think it'll have? I think they'll ultimately be like the haves, those that are formally associated with WWE from a talent and promotional perspective, that are in good standing. and the have-nots. Those that can establish a relationship even though they want to, or maybe they're want to not work in those restrictions and do their own things. And that may be the only places where AEW talent, who can, most of whom seemingly can work wherever they want, as long as it aligns well with AEW's needs, maybe they'll only be there. So I think in the end of the day, we'll have a pretty formal minor league system. It's kind of what's needed, I would say, even though it'd be kind of sad to see the end of all these creative, innovative, artistic promotions that can really go places. But when you cut off the talent pipeline and you control things and you sort of give people hope, they're all going to point towards, the WWE system if the ambition is to bring things up to such a formal structure.
My only issue with the title belts is, let's say you got a guy on your show, and it's like, oh, I'm bringing him in, but I want to get my guy over, but he's the WWEID champion. Do I have to call Triple H? Or do you call Gabe Sapolsky and be like, hey, I need this guy to lose in my show, even though he's your champion? Like, who is control of that? Because technically speaking, they're the WWEID champion. Do you want them losing? Does it matter if they it's just, I don't know, slippery slope right there with that.
Yeah, and especially and smartly, WWEID is doing this already, where they're showing clips, or I think they've even had full matches from talent. So it's not so much of where certain NWA title changes were hidden for years, and we didn't even know about it until footage came out, or before that, of course, newsletters and magazine articles. Somebody covered it and reported on it, even though it wasn't supposed to be. Here, of course, everything is open and known. So I think as WWE ID champion, the commitment is to protect that belt and title, and if you're having a match, you're not going to lose clean. But there are things that you can do, of course, to put your own talent over strong, and depending on how high profile the WWE ID champion becomes, to get a little bit of rub from that, right? That was basically what promotions did with Ric Flair, certainly the old NWA system through Ric Flair, most prominently, but Harley Race, Terry Funk, and so on, where you lose by a hair, or get screwed out of it, or whatever it may be, and you look better at the end. I don't know if the WWE ID belt will have such a cachet to it, where that rub will mean a lot, but there's things that you can do. But I think if you are a champion, you're probably not going to lose unless it makes sense to WWE to do so.
And it's funny when you look at it too, because it's like, do you need a Dory Funk or a Lou Thez? Do you need a shooter as champion just in case somebody shoots on you and tries to beat you? You know what I mean? That's interesting too, because what happens if you get a guy? It's like, screw it. I know I'm never going to WWE. I'm going to be WWE ID champion. I'm just going to shoot on this guy and beat him. That would be crazy. That'd be nuts.
Yeah. I think no, for sure, anything can happen. I think for the most part, the mentality is everyone sort of kind of grew up as a big fan of wrestling and so on. But I wouldn't get in there with someone like Alpha Jr. I don't know if you saw that footage from what was it, within the last year, in a small show in Queens, in a brewery, where something about who he was wrestling really ticked him off, and he just beat the guy to a pulp.
And he's obviously can do that. And really, I mean, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? It's one of those slippery slopes, like legit shooter, Samoan tough guy. It's like, damn, what the hell am I going to do with this guy? What if maybe, what else, just randomly say this, and I'm just making this up completely, but Tony Khan gets in a hold of Alpha Jr. Is like, hey, you're wrestling WWEID champion. I want you to beat this guy. I'll give you $10,000. You know what I mean? It could be old school Iron Sheik, Vern Gagne stuff going on right here.
Yeah. And you could sort of have fun with it in terms of breaking the fourth wall too. There's always that doubt. WWE could be okay, we want to get a little attention to the ID program, so let's have it seemingly keep it quiet, somebody that we've signed, and have them do that, and then that summer punk type of
Yes.
thing, anti-establishment. But what's interesting, and I tweeted about this, I mean, we could still follow it, but it's getting a little bit confusing how you get to the WWE main roster, right? And I think smartly so, as they shake things out. It doesn't always have to be through a linear system, right? But you have the NIL talent, some of whom will never train for pro wrestling. Others are sort of being groomed for pro wrestling. You have tryouts that are for experienced talent and those just starting out. You have, NXT who are TV ready. You have NXT who are Evolve ready. And you have those that are just, in training. You have talents that are already experienced that can debut right away on the main roster. So it's sort of like thinking about it like a mind map. There's so many different ways to get in now, which I think it's good to have these various capacities, because you want to get talent, from all different ways.
So as far as AEW is concerned, 'cause, we're obviously where WWE is, we got to talk about AEW. What's going on with them, and what's going on with them adjusting some venues, maybe doing some music halls? Dynamite did some cool theater, which I thought looked awesome. To me, I just love that look. I think they should do more places like that. What's going on with AEW?
Yeah, 100%. And it's like was thematic on the show for, certainly the last 2 years. It was very clear that AEW in major arenas, mid-major arenas, like, weren't making sense. So were they going to have to go, let's say, and nothing wrong with it, to Dothan, Alabama, and tape in like a place like NWA is doing Hard Times, the venue that was one of the early UFC venues in the Outlaw days. Like, go to these like semi-major markets, not 25, not top 50 markets that have major arenas, or like look for small arenas or darken them and so on. And maybe inspired by Hammerstein, or maybe like in motion a lot before that, because you have to plan these things, was to go to classy concert halls, music venues, theaters, as some people would say. And that has been a great solution. So you can go to Boston, although I think the venue that they had been using in Boston was really good previously. But you can go to Boston at Fenway Music Hall, and it's a few thousand seats, and you can have a great look to your show. So kudos to the team at AEW, who, we were just reporting the facts, but basically on its face being like, why do you keep booking these big venues? And there'll still be ones that pop up here and there, but it just seems like a smart thing to do is, maybe have the biggest show of the year in the UK, or yes, you can try in Texas, like an indoor stadium, although that seems to be a struggle, but pay-per-views or, premium live events, whatever they call them, in the major arenas, or half major arenas. 10,000 seats is more reasonable probably today than 20. But week to week, to do it at a music venue that's classy, that looks good and doesn't look low rent, it seems like a great way to go.
Love it. Love the idea. So TNA obviously is dealing with WWE right now. They're even going to Full Sail. They're doing a lot of things that are definitely on the positive side of things. So tell us about TNA and possibly selling out some venues.
Yeah, a lot of little pieces of news for TNA today. Somewhat unexpectedly, once, like, sometimes it's quiet in terms of like where they're going next, and then they roll out a few at once, which makes sense too. I'm not sure if they're going to try their like super ticket sales day. I think they tried that a time or two, but the timing didn't always align well with that. So I don't know if that's their strategy, but it's good to get a lot of different shows out, at once, as long as one doesn't get lost in the fold. So first of all, we'd been talking about Full Sail, that obviously very small venue, based on interest. You would expect TNA would sell it out, but they charged, a fair amount for tickets, maybe 175 for the first row. I might be mixing that up with House of Glory, but they sold both out. So clearly a win there. I think it would be smart for them to go back. Although for some reason, to me, just seeing the clips, it looked smaller when TNA was there than when NXT was there. It just might be like a perception and lighting or something like that. I don't know if you saw, John, the clips with like Tessa Blanchard getting a Razzie there based on her past comments that are no joke on seemingly racist comments. So the fans were giving her a hard time. You have to give people the opportunity to change, but sort of once you have the perception in someone's mind, it's hard to get past there. So that's just a note on that. But in terms of show announced, May 23rd and 24th in Brampton, Ontario, Greater Toronto Market. Smart venue selection. Looks like a 5,000 seat venue. Looks like they've had some boxing there with like seated dinner type of experience before, and then fixed seats. I'm not sure so much of wrestling. I'm sure wrestling has passed through there at some point, but like a minor league hockey arena, a good place for them to be. Something that I was thinking about, John, was that Maple Leaf Pro had announced a partnership with Qatar, as we decided on together last week, pro wrestling, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. And then TNA is announced as having a relationship with them. Certainly, both promotions would want to run Toronto, but Maple Leaf had announced their show in Toronto in May, just a couple weeks before this show, that they were sort of leading up to it, and then suddenly TNA is there too. So it just might be a coincidence, or it's something to be on the lookout for if there's any hard feelings remaining of Scott, related to Scott D'Amore, or just territory, both running out of Toronto as sort of like a home base in a way. Looking at the long talked about Slammiversary, and still quite far away, in July, 2,136 tickets out the door, plus 24 in the last 7 days. So it's seemingly moving at that slow pace, some tickets moving, but it's a very big venue. We'd probably continue to see this until about 4 or 6 weeks out, where it would be expected that tickets would pick up. Obviously, if there's a big matchup, or some type of draw announced, you can move tickets much more than that. And of course, this comes from WrestleTix, who will rely upon a lot this week, as we typically do. Some notes about El Paso. So most of the venue is not, specific seating. It's GA, of course. So the first night that they're there, in terms of floor seats, they've distributed 543 out of 557. So at least in terms of reserved, certainly looking like a sellout. And not bad, relatively so, the following day, 398 tickets of the same reserved setup. Obviously, unless we see all the GA go off the map or something like that, we'll just have to wait to see what it looks like when it airs, or pictures from the show. Now, in terms of talking about Qatar Pro Wrestling, I was going to have a whole segment on this show, which we've talked about a little bit, but for today, we'll focus on the TNA element. So Super Slam 3 has secured collaborations with key industry leaders who will play an essential role in enhancing the event experience. TNA Wrestling joins as a supporting partner. This partnership is key, as it is a signing for a long-term collaboration that extends beyond this event to include future regional ventures of QPW as well. So kind of vague, but TNA is on their marketing materials now, and we'll just have to see what happens. So actually, this is interesting. In the article, I just noticed it now. Thriller TV. I think they meant
Triller.
Well, which actually maybe no. I guess this might be regional. This might be like in the Middle East. Actually, Thriller TV, the broadcasting partner, will bring fans worldwide. So that's maybe they meant, actually, I guess they meant Triller. So just a typo there. But more shows announced April 17th at the Cox Pavilion in Vegas. So this has the Unbreakable show, actually, that we referenced last time. This has a seating capacity of between 2,500 and 3,100. So again, when you're not the number one or number two promotion, although they certainly do it too. And we've seen a crossover recently. There's some talents that, have challenging backgrounds. And you have to like manage that and highlight. No, you wouldn't highlight it, but you have to manage that, and when others highlight it, and so on. So there's a trade-off there, and TNA has certainly existed in that world for a number of years. So just looking at the Unbreakable poster, there's Moose, Tessa Blanchard, Masha Slamovich, and the Hardy. So firstly, to make it clear, Masha Slamovich and Matt Hardy have no checkered past or anything like that, or any difficulties. Jeff Hardy has managed a seemingly, in the public sphere, a number of addiction issues. So no one is blaming him for that, except I believe when he was arrested or had issues with like drunk driving or impaired driving or whatever it may be. Obviously, that's once you do that, there's no excuse for that. Tessa Blanchard, we talked about her issues, and Moose's issues in terms of domestic violence accusations are pretty well documented in this public sphere too. So that's just TNA, continuing to need to manage these issues. It seems like with Jeff Hardy and Moose, no one's talking about those much anymore, and Moose had crossed over surprisingly to NXT. But Tessa Blanchard issues are are apparent, in terms of like we talked about in this section, with fans continuing to bring that up, despite what she said she's done to right or wrong and others' opinions of that. Irvine, California, the Breen Events Center. TNA will be there on May 1st and 2nd. That's a 5,000 seating capacity. Somebody had shared, it might have been Draven on X, that TNA plans to have a live event after every pay-per-view, which makes a lot of sense because it's freshening up things and changes that you want to cover. And just a little piece shared by Sean Hernandez, who congratulated two members of his extended family of his promotion and so on, that Rosario Rodriguez is part of the TNA traveling merchandise staff, and Terry Villarreal is a part of the massage therapy and wellness staff. So it's interesting that, we know people have to manage the merchandise, but I didn't often think about that TNA would have such support systems. I don't want to say amenities because I think it's really necessary for trying to be an A-class type operation, but it just reminds us that TNA, just like some of the bigger companies, employs many people, whether it's full-time or just on an event basis, and an important part of the wrestling economy.
Also, they're going to have a live show as well. They just announced May 1st in Irvine, California. Then May 2nd, they're going to have the taping. So they're adding on shows. They're adding on live shows. TNA is just, I don't know, they keep building here. This WWE grouping, this WWE pairing is really helping them.
Yeah, far and away, certainly at their level, at minimum, like, the clearest growth promotion, clearest in terms of like positive momentum. We don't know about the finances, right? Like booking some of these bigger venues, you're not making full use of them all the time. You're going on the road, you're traveling more and so on, and that's pretty expensive every time out the door. So we don't know if that's a net gain or a negative, or if it's for perception and planning, but it all looks good. And obviously there's a lot more interest, and time will tell.
What is going on with Bushi Road, who obviously runs New Japan Pro Wrestling? What's going on? What's the latest?
So just in terms of their stock, which had been down for a while, first of all, to note overall as a company that they're up almost 50% at the time I took the screenshot, at least, on their stock. So overall, they're doing well. Bushi Road has reported strong financial results for the second quarter of fiscal 2025. Now you might think, well, it's only February. So in Japan, it's done differently, driven by significant growth in its trading card game Live at 10. The company's performance surpassed expectations, prompting an upward revision of the earnings forecast for the fiscal year. In the second half, Bushiroad plans to continue its growth trajectory by broadcasting a new TV anime and expanding its product offerings in TCG and console games, which could further bolster its market position and benefit stakeholders. However, the part that interests us is the quarterly sales and operating profit by segment. So their sports segment, which specifically includes New Japan and Stardom. So their net sales were up 1,267 million yen, up by 100. But their operating profit was down 134 million yen. So there have been 3 quarters in the last 3 years that have been negative. This one is a little bit more than the others. So it might just vary, quarter to quarter. But obviously, if you're looking at 2 of the biggest promotions, especially New Japan, or combining 2 of the highest profile promotions, and looking to them as like the industry leaders in Japan when they're losing money, it's a concern. So directly from their report, sales declined quarter over quarter due to the off season between big matches. The audience attendance remained soft. Stardom promoted the review of the operational structure through employee expansion, website improvements, and the launch of a dedicated app. Enhancing content and match quality has improved audience attraction and profitability in the entertainment business. In the second half of 2025, both New Japan and Stardom plan to hold multiple events at large venues, with attendance expected to increase compared to the first half. Obviously, as we just talked about with TNA, running bigger venues comes with more cost. Although in Japan, I think it's, obviously they have a very good handle of what venues and so on, usually to focus on, because they've done it for years and years and years. In fiscal year 2025 Q3, 2 events were held at the Tokyo Dome over 2 days. On January 4th, New Japan hosted Wrestle Kingdom, and on the following day, all the promotions got together for Wrestle Dynasty. Wrestle Kingdom welcomed 24,107, and Wrestle Dynasty hit 16,300. Okay. All right, and the second part that I had repeats the first. We'll skip that. Okay, a couple of the events in the U.S., because that's really what we cover here in terms of New Japan attendance, outside of something unique like Wrestle Kingdom or Wrestle Dynasty. So May 9th, we're about 10 weeks out at the time of this recording. 112 additional tickets distributed in 7 days, so that's a good number this early. 6,011 tickets in Ontario, California, Toyota Arena. 3,721 set up. Last year, they did 2,886. So almost exactly a year to the date. So it'll be an interesting comparison point. This venue, in terms of the setup that they're using, has a total number of 6,525 on the map. So they can modify as interest warrants, although I don't imagine that they would need to. With WWEID is certainly a more intriguing show in terms of Tanahashi's, as far as we know thus far, as far as Tanahashi's planned retirement. 2,758 tickets distributed, 115 since the last update. So they've pretty much consistently been doing about 100 every 7 days. So this is looking really good. Like I mentioned, I think this could be the most attended pro wrestling show in the U.S. in 2025, outside WWE and AEW. Of course, TNA can always surprise. And once in a while, something pops up that you're like, oh, I never heard of that. But timing, alignment, and so on just creates a big number every once in a while. Align well in terms of promotion. C2E2 is like a big comic, expo, and Tanahashi will be there on April 12th. So that's the day. Let's see here. It's the day after. So they can align that marketing together, which they've started to do on the New Japan website. But you'd want to see, like, for people interested in the C2E2, that news traveling to the show as well. A little bit more of Bushiroad related news, New Japan and Stardom. So Tom Fain, a past guest of the podcast, a former magazine publisher, and so on. So he is leaving the company, and he tweeted out, "Have heard there's already some misinformation out there. Like everyone else at Bushiroad, I was on a 1-year deal. They asked me to come back at the same rate. I counter-proposed international content expansion. They said the domestic market is the focus, and we thanked each other." So that's interesting to see. Like, it doesn't mean that they're obviously taking the foot off the pedal. In terms of international, certainly. Oh, and I guess that makes it right. Tanahashi's last match in the U.S., right? Like in Japan, they're not going to give it away here. So obviously he'll have a last match in Japan. I assume, the next Wrestle Kingdom show, something like that. That might already be defined. Let us know. But it's not all negative news. Yesterday I was married and just moving on. So interesting to see if Tom remains in Japan, but we wish him luck. We won't be hearing about it on X, but connected to him on LinkedIn. So any public news that's shared in that forum that relates to wrestling, we'll certainly pass that along. Obviously, given his passion and commitment to the field, having originally moved out there to work in wrestling, is probably not the end of the story.
What is going on with Sucubon? What's the latest?
Yeah, every time I'm like, okay, maybe they're not going to run again, or whatever. Like, they come out with something which is surprising. So their Berlin debut is set for March 6th. This is at let's see, where's the venue? Cool. I'm not sure if it's pronounced like this, but it looks good. Cool House, Berlin. So it's kind of like it looks like a Spartan warehouse with like 2 tiers of railings. So I guess like it kind of looks like a fight club, but it's full of wrestling or something similar, where like people can hang off the railings safely and watch the show. I guess if you fill up both tiers in the floor and so on, it could hold 1,200. So kind of a cool, unique venue. I wouldn't expect anything less from Sukiban.
What is going on with Triller?
Or formerly known as Thriller in Qatar. So just one piece, but the one piece of information is pretty much could send shockwaves through the industry. We've been talking about this for a while. Most people aren't talking much about it, but it could be a gigantic story. So Triller, when it finally combined with AGBA, went public on the NASDAQ, and they just rang the bell on the NASDAQ within the last week. When it went public on the NASDAQ, it was $5.60 a share. It quickly dropped 20% to $4.45 a share. When it dropped to around $2, I was kind of like, well, this stock, especially when it was AGBA before the merger, it like zips up and down, and it's you could really make a lot if you time it right. So I took a risk, and then I sold it when it was pretty much even, or maybe like a modest loss. I was like, this is just too crazy. But now, as of the time that we're recording, or my last screenshot, they are at $1.16. So just in the last couple of months, year to date, they're down 54%. Somebody can do the math of 560. So I think that's like down about 80%. So we're getting into what I would consider dangerous territory, because if you go, and I think it's a little bit more complicated than this. So don't take this as fact. Look it up. People that know, let us know. If you go below $1 on the NASDAQ and you remain there for a long time, I think you have to be there for a year, your stock could be delisted. And then it's just a lot more difficult to trade the shares. So it's not, as we talked about, it's like in about a month that they'll have their quarterly earnings report. So that'll be really interesting. But one has to think about, without knowing anything on the inside, like how much cash do they have on hand? We know that they've been behind. It's been reported that they've been behind on payments in their history to certain vendors and so on. And so much of the independent industry is reliant on Triller that it could be like such a shift, right? Like, let's say you have these two things. Maybe I should have put this story higher. You have like one side, WWEID, to reshape the industry, and Triller is on what looks like very shaky ground. So when the two meet, you could have like really substantive change. Unfortunately, I don't remember who said it, but it was a great point. One of the people on X that has like deep financial analysis, usually on like Fight Sports, but they said like buried in Triller is this super valuable commodity, although they have a number of commodities, and I would consider like the Triller Plus Fight, app to be one of them. But on its own, basically, kind of like carving out its own thing within this universe, the bare knuckle, right? And like that is one of the only fight promotions to gain a tremendous amount of momentum. Maybe, John, the most since the UFC. I'm trying to think about it because I don't feel like any, like the modern, like since the UFC had its like second rise, like because I can't think of any like MMA promotions that have like they've always been like second rung, and they've had their moments, but they haven't like sort of like stood on their own. The boxing promotions were around already. Although I loved Glory, especially when they're promoting in the US, like they never really caught much momentum. So bare knuckle is really like one of those promotions that they really stand out, and surprisingly, like there's a lot of opportunity for growth. So if they had to like start carving things out and selling them, if they did, then that would be a wonderful thing. We already know that they've been, they have their own platform, obviously, but the bare knuckle rights, right? They went to the Zone, and separately, which they'd be able to do if they had it themselves, Vice as well, but they're not so much utilizing it themselves, which tells a story in itself.
What is going on with GC Dub?
Yeah, so our friend Brett Lauderdale is very into the idea of going to every state. Like, I think for himself as a promoter, like he wants to say, I've been to every state in the US to promote. Now, no one cares about more and no one knows the bottom line more than Brett Lauderdale. So if this is best for business for him, and he can cover his expenses and whatever, then obviously that's great. Just looking at it on its face, like, why now do you need to like have this checklist where you're going to like every state? Because there's even like, if you want to go to different markets, there's so many different markets within states, but they'll get there if there's not a rush, and so on. So they announced a number of things, but I just thinking back on like, remember John, when they went to Hawaii and we were like looking at the Eventbrite map and it was like, it looked like it was 3 or 4 rows deep. So you take all of the talent out to Hawaii, it's a nice vacation and whatever, but like, was that worth it? So you just have to be like careful about having this like goal if it like makes sense. And obviously Brett looks at the bottom line and ticket sales, I'm sure, multiple times a day. So we'll just see what happens. But talking about coming to new places, Arkansas on June 20th, Alaska on October 4th, return to Philly on April 6th. Obviously, a market they know well. Back to the Harrah's Racetrack and Casino. I don't know if that's Philly proper, but we've sort of talked about it. That's basically the same. Luis Perez was kind enough, who went to the Jersey J Cup in Jersey City, to tweet a wide shot of, not sure if it was the first or second night. I think it was the first night. And, in that small hall, which has a lot of wrestling, it looked full there. Now, thank you, WrestleTix. They ran every show on Ticketmaster for the collective. So we're going to go through it show by show, not really analyzing it, but it's interesting to see the flow from one to another in terms of interest. Now, the maximum potential capacity for this venue, for the Pearl in Vegas, is 2022. Now, in every seating map, it looks like the first upper tier, the back part of the center is closed off. So I don't know if that's a production area, or if that's something that they can open up if ticket sales warrant it. So maybe the capacity is closer to 1,700 or something like that. But let's go through this quickly. Effie's Big Gay Brunch. Before I start. Now, there is a super ticket or whatever they call it. So if you buy a ticket for one show, it gets you into every show. I don't know if there's variations of that, but we're going to count. We can't distinguish between how many super tickets right now. But the same way, if you have Knicks season tickets and you have for every show, when they report the attendance, they don't say okay, these are the amount of season ticket holders and individual and so on. So we'll just consider if you bought a super ticket, somebody buying a ticket for every show. So let's go through it though. Effie's Big Gay Brunch, 673. GCW versus TJPW versus DDT, 653. Spring Break Cluster F, 700. TJPW, 790. Okay. DDT, 628. Joey Janela's Spring Break. So, John, I think people are going to have to listen to your interview with Joey Janela to probably learn about his status and what things are looking like for April 18th. But in terms of what's been announced, Joey Janela against Sabu in his retirement match. Obviously, this has the most tickets sold, although I didn't get to the end, I'm assuming. 1,025. Obviously, it'll still be a draw with just Sabu there, and Joey Janela would be there in some capacity, but I'm assuming that he'll do all he can to wrestle there. Heels Have Eyes, 659. Defy, and this is an interesting one because Defy and GCW have a great relationship. When Defy came to Brooklyn and Chicago, I don't think they did very well at the gate. Neither did GCW those weekends. But here again, 225 tickets. Although from Seattle to Vegas, obviously a lot closer than coming to the East Coast or even the Midwest. But far behind everyone else. High Spots Super Show, 449. Josh Barnett's Bloodsport, 499. Progress Wrestling, 253. So again, a brand that stands on its own, like Defy, and probably a similar profile to Defy, hasn't moved very many tickets. So the thing that'll be fun is to total them up at the end, because we don't once the final accounting is done after show times, to see what was the total amount of tickets distributed. Now, it's not over. Dragon Gate is in the same hotel. GCW is handling their ticket sales via Eventbrite. But like I mentioned, a different part of the hotel, not the big venue. So 10 or more tickets still remain in the second row and beyond. Just covering a few. Oh, actually, we have extensive details here. So ticket sales outside of the collective in terms of what we could tell from Eventbrite. So February 28th in the San Diego market, ringside seats has 10 or more tickets remaining. So that's just a week out as of we're recording. So that's obviously pretty slow. LA, one of their strongest regular markets. In March, second row is almost gone. 10 tickets. Sorry, just one ticket remaining. Maybe even that ticket is gone. Their stage seating is gone as well. So third row has 10 or more. That usually ends up doing fine. At the Nile Theater in Mesa, Arizona, 10 or more tickets in the second row and beyond. The Atlantic City, second row, 10 or more tickets, and beyond. Looking at Chicago, they have March 29th. They have one front row ticket remaining. So that's likely gone. It will be in a moment. And second row and beyond has the maximum on this ticket website for Talia Hall. You could just look at 6 tickets, at a time.
What is going on as far as your favorite topic here and your favorite topic there, here and there?
Yes, John, it always makes me smile when you say that. So we're gonna start out in Fargo today, don't you know? Sorry to our listeners in Fargo. The biggest annual pro wrestling event in the Fargo area brought hard-hitting action Saturday night. Below Zero Wrestling hosted their largest ever iteration of their flagship show, Winter Slam, at the Bolter Machinery Arena on the Red River Valley Fairgrounds, drawing a crowd of over 1,000 people for the first time. The card was stacked with Mr. Anderson being a primary attraction. So it's always fun to see a independent show do over 1,000 tickets. What about going back to the same market after you've had success? Certainly, we saw the challenges, although ultimate success of GCW coming back to the Hammerstein Ballroom. What about ACW reopening up Poughkeepsie's former Mid-Hudson Civic Center, now known as the MJ Neshawat Convention Center? So still quite early. In May is the show. Tickets distributed about $360. Current setup is $1,274. John, whenever I see a show in Poughkeepsie, I always think about maybe I can go, because my family and I go to a dude ranch, a family dude ranch called the Rocking Horse Ranch in Highland Park, New York, which we recommend. A really fun place. But we always take the Metro North up there, and it's Poughkeepsie Station, and they pick us up from there. And right next to there is the Mid-Hudson Civic Center. So I'm always thinking, can I sneak in there on the way there or back, or in the evening to a show? So like I mentioned, 360 so far. So certainly plenty of time and so on. Now looking at our friend Kevin Kleinrock's Mass Mania experience, they're going to their next iteration from the, I don't know if it would be defined as a trial show, but the initial show that they ran, I think, in Texas last year to sort of get their feet wet and so on. But now they have 2 shows, so we'll have to see how they do. May 3rd in Duluth, Georgia, at the Gas South Arena is 500 tickets distributed. And thanks to WrestleTix again, I've reminded them that they're having a second show in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the very large Bojangles Arena. 338 tickets out the door so far. Just some notes from WrestleTix. AEW has frequented this building over the years. Mass Mania also show in Duluth, as we talked about. We'll see which one ends up doing better. Most floor seats are $88 here, which seems reasonable. Just checking the pulse. Okay, so they were looking for feedback if anyone's planning to go. So I actually got feedback from one of our loyal listeners in the Georgia area that he's taking his son to the show at the Gas South Arena. So we'll get a report on that. Finally, a little bit of controversy here. Ricardo Rodriguez's Three Legacies Wrestling, which has really carved out a niche in the Pennsylvania market, especially around Amish country. They're really involved in the local scene there, and they rented out a show. They rented out a high school, not unexpectedly, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and The show is a fundraiser, or a part of the proceeds will go towards LGBT Central PA and Lancaster Pride. So in terms of the way the show was promoted, it's called Pride Power Slam. It made it look to people that weren't following that perhaps this is like a drag queen event. And you see in the news here in New York, at least, like there might be like a drag queen story hour in the public library, and some people are like yay, and other people are like, oh my god, like how can they do this sort of thing? And this event was happening in a high school, so it caused enough controversy that Channel 21 referenced it. So I'm just going to pretty much read that report. Channel 21 is getting answers surrounding an event that will be held at a local school this weekend that some parents say they weren't aware of. The flyer for Pride Power Slam shows it will be held at the Dauphin County Technical School. While the school is not sponsoring or promoting the event, we've learned it has been renting out the gymnasium for the last 2 decades. The administrator, he told CBS 21 in the email. As part of our standard facility rental process, Three Legacies Wrestling rented our facility for the event. This group has utilized our space multiple times, meeting all the requirements outlined in our policies. The rental request was reviewed and approved in December, following the same procedures. The controversy stems from the fact that Three Legacies has independently chosen to donate a portion of their event proceeds to a third party. However, this does not change the nature of the event or our school's role. We are simply the rental venue and have no involvement in the organization's charitable decisions. Civitello said the gymnasium has been rented out for at least the last 20 years. The cost of renting out the gymnasium is $100 per hour, which I love to see, those little things, plus hourly rates for maintenance and custodial services. The executive director of the LGBT Center of Central PA, Amber Roadcap, is clearing up some misconceptions about this specific event. It is not specifically a drag event. It is not specifically a queer event. It is just a Pride Power Slam wrestling event that happens to support the LGBT Center of Central PA and Lancaster Pride. So interestingly, I went to Three Legacies X page just to see like how they were addressing it, if at all, and they chose not to write anything about it. That, as far as I can tell.
Very, very interesting. Let's wrap this bad boy up. Before we do, tell us about March 11th.
Oh, yeah. March 11th, New York City. Be there. I will be moderating a forum to demystify Linda McMahon. Obviously, many of you are familiar with Linda McMahon, but really people are struggling trying to understand her forthcoming role as secretary and running this department. So we're going to be having a guest panel to speak on her background, obviously in business, but also in public service, and try and like read a little bit of the tea leaves, like what will her policies be like? Will there be this department, anymore? Based on what people are saying, and try and figure things out together. It's a free event at the City College of New York, the Colin Powell School. You can look them up on Eventbrite, or probably the easiest way is to go to my X, and it's pinned at the top for the link. Especially if you're in town, staying in a hotel for Monday Night Raw, you can roll it through. And certainly that evening, NXT Roadblock will be done with plenty of time for you to get dinner and make your way downtown to the theater at Madison Square Garden.
All right. You could follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChewManPowerTrip. How about you, Lavie? Where can everybody find you and follow you?
On X, follow me at Lavie Marg, Lavie Marg. I'm too lazy to get on Blue Sky right now. I can't commit to something like that right now. Check out my long form articles on LionCubJobSearch.com and prep yourself for the discussion, or just even learn more. TrumpMania, Vince McMahon, WWE, and the Making America's 45th President on Amazon.
Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We'll see you right back here next week for a little business of the business. See you next week, folks.